The storm began before midnight. It wasn't just the sky breaking open. It was as if the world itself had chosen that hour to echo the tearing inside her. Rain lashed against the windows of Seabrook General, furious and relentless. The lights flickered like hesitant hope. Crystal Freeman gripped the hospital bed rails, her knuckles pale against the warm brown of her skin. Sweat rolled down her temples, and each contraction felt like her body was being carved open by invisible hands. "Stephen," she gasped, reaching out into the chaos. "Please." Her husband didn't look at her. He was by the window phone pressed to his ear, muttering about numbers and cars and deadlines, things that belonged to another universe. In this one, the world had shrunk to her heartbeat, her pain, and the faint pulse of the child fighting to come alive. "Stephen." Her voice cracked with pain and disbelief. He turned at last, irritation flickering in his blue eyes. "Crystal, I can't, not right now. The dealership. The dealership." She almost laughed, a raw, broken sound that wasn't laughter at all. "Our baby's coming." The monitors screamed. Nurses rushed in, shouting words she couldn't grasp. Heart rate dropping, emergency prep oxygen. Someone said C-section. Someone else said complications. Stephen paled. "Wait. What? Surgery? You said this would be natural." Quick, Dr. Martinez, the obstetrician, looked him dead in the eye. "Your wife and baby are in distress. We need to move fast. You need to be here for her." But Stephen's phone buzzed again, vibrating in his palm like a moral test he'd already failed. I need a minute," he muttered. "The flooding my car." "Don't you dare," Crystal tried to say, but the next contraction stole her breath. He was already at the door. "I'll be right back," he lied. "I just need to move the car." The door slammed. The sound sliced through the room like a verdict. And in that moment, something inside Crystal broke. Not her body, not her will. Something deeper. A trust that had taken years to build, now shattered in a heartbeat. "Mrs. Freeman," Dr. Martinez said urgently, "you need to focus. We're losing time." But Crystal couldn't hear her anymore. Her world was dissolving in white noise, the whine of wind through the windows, the metallic taste of fear, the slow collapse of everything she thought she knew about love. She whispered one word through her tears. "Alone." The lights flickered again. Then abruptly, darkness. The backup generators coughed to life, dim but steady. Nurses moved like ghosts under the red glow of emergency lights. The door burst open. Crystal's mind, half delirious with pain, thought for a moment it was Stephen. But it wasn't. A tall man filled the doorway, rain dripping from his hair, his soaked jacket clinging to a body that seemed built for both strength and storms. His eyes, gray clear, cutting through the chaos, found hers instantly. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and low. "It's all right. I've got you." His hands, rough, warm, human, found hers and held on. It was absurd, impossible. A stranger was holding her hand while she brought a child into the world. Yet the way he looked at her, not with pity, but fierce, unwavering certainty, steadied something deep inside her. Who are you?" she whispered. "Brian," he said simply. "Brian Lockhart." He didn't release her hand. "And I'm not leaving you." Dr. Martinez hesitated, but something in his presence calmed even her. "Fine," she said. "If you're staying, make yourself useful. Hold her hand. Keep her breathing steady." The next contraction hit like thunder. Crystal screamed. Her body arched. The storm outside roared back in answer. Through it all, Brian's voice anchored her. "Breathe with me. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. You're doing great, Crystal. You're stronger than the storm. Stronger than the storm." The words sank into her like light into dark water. Minutes blurred into hours. Pain blurred into exhaustion. Through every contraction, he stayed wiping her tears, whispering strength into her collapsing world. He didn't flinch when she cried, didn't recoil when she crushed his fingers, didn't look away when her body did what bodies do in labor. He simply stayed. When the final push came, the storm reached its peak. Lightning tore across the sky like a divine spotlight. Then a cry. Tiny, fragile, perfect. Her baby. The room erupted in motion. Nurses cheered. Someone laughed through tears. Brian exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. His shoulders dropped rainwater mingling with his own tears. "She's perfect," he murmured, his voice breaking. Crystal turned her head weakly. The doctor placed the tiny bundle on her chest. The baby's skin was soft as dawn, her cries fierce as the storm that had carried her here. Crystal looked at her daughter, then at the stranger still holding her hand. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something pure recognition. The way two broken souls might recognize the same kind of emptiness in each other. "You stayed," she whispered. "I said I would." He smiled then, small but real. "And I keep my promises." The storm began to fade, the rain softening against the windows, as if even the heavens had exhausted themselves. Crystal's body trembled from exhaustion, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. When she woke hours later, the sky was pale gray, soft light filtering through the blinds. Her baby slept in a small cradle beside her. Brian was gone. Only a note remained on the bedside table, the paper damp at the edges from his rain-soaked hand. "You're not alone anymore. BL." Crystal stared at the note for a long time, her fingers tracing the initials as if they might burn truth into her skin. For a fleeting moment, she let herself believe it. Then the silence pressed in heavier than before, because in the next room, she could hear Dr. Martinez talking to a nurse in low tones. Her husband never came back. The doctor said quietly. They found his car down by the east lot, engine running, door open. "Abandoned?" the nurse asked. The doctor hesitated. "More like fled." The words pierced through the thin walls like arrows. Her stomach turned cold. Not because she hadn't known she had, but because hearing it out loud made it final. He was gone. For good. She turned to look at her baby. The child stirred tiny fingers curling in sleep. Crystal brushed a thumb across her daughter's cheek. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's just us now." But even as she said it, her heart whispered something else. A name she'd only heard once that night, carried on the rhythm of thunder. Brian. Who was he really? And why had his eyes looked like he knew exactly what it meant to lose everything? She didn't know yet that the man who'd held her hand through the storm hadn't just saved her life. He'd changed its course. That before the week was over, he would appear again, this time, not as a stranger, but as the unexpected answer to every prayer she'd stopped believing would be heard. Outside, dawn broke over Seabrook Harbor, pale gold, spreading over the waves. The world was quiet, but in that quiet, something new had begun, fragile as the newborn breath beside her, and just as unstoppable. Where kindness turns into connection, and the man who stayed becomes the man who dares to ask, what if this storm wasn't the end? Crystal. But the beginning. The storm had passed, but its silence was cruel. 3 days later, Seabrook General smelled of disinfectant, damp corridors, and endings. Crystal sat on the edge of her hospital bed, a paper discharge bracelet cutting into her wrist. Outside, puddles reflected the washed-out sky. soft gray, almost merciful, as if the world was trying to apologize. Zara. That was what she'd decided to name her daughter, slept in the bassinet, beside her lips parted in small, trusting dreams. Crystal brushed a thumb across the baby's cheek, her heart tightening at the miracle of it. So small, so perfect, so completely hers. She had no one waiting for her, no home ready for them, no savings left, but she had this child, and somehow that made the ruin survivable. When the nurse wheeled in her release papers, Crystal thanked her in the automatic, polite tone of a woman who'd forgotten how gratitude felt. The nurse smiled softly, then hesitated. "Miss Freeman, there's something for you at the desk," she said. "A delivery. No sender name." Crystal frowned. "A delivery?" The nurse nodded. "Left early this morning." Curiosity nudged through the fog of exhaustion. She wrapped Zara in her blanket and carried her down the hall past rooms full of other new mothers, surrounded by flowers, balloons, and waiting arms. At the reception desk sat a simple brown box. No card, no handwriting she recognized. Inside, folded neatly, was a small ivory blanket embroidered with the initials ZL, Zara Lockhart. For a moment, Crystal stopped breathing. At the bottom lay an envelope with her name written in firm, precise handwriting. "You don't owe me thanks, but I owe you peace. This blanket belonged to my mother. She used to say it kept nightmares away. I thought your daughter might need that more than I do. BL." Crystal's throat tightened. She had no idea how he'd found her name, or why he'd thought to do this, but she could see his face again in her mind. Rain-slicked hair, steady eyes, the way he'd said, "You're not alone anymore." She looked down at her baby. "Zara Lockhart," she whispered, tasting the name. It sounded wrong, not because it didn't fit, but because it felt too kind, too hopeful for someone like her. That night she left the hospital with nothing but the baby, the blanket, and the echo of a stranger's voice. The apartment felt smaller when she returned, the kind of small that made air itself heavier. The kitchen table was still cluttered with bills and unopened envelopes. The fridge hummed like a machine trying to forget it was empty. She found a note taped to it. Stephen's handwriting sharp and careless. "I took what's left. Don't try to find me. You'll be fine. You always are." For a long moment she just stood there, holding the note, her eyes dry. She'd already cried herself empty. When Zara whimpered, she folded the paper, set it on the counter, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We don't need him." But even as she said it, the truth pressed against her ribs like a bruise. She had no job, no money, no plan, only willpower. And that, she told herself, had to be enough. The days that followed blurred together, feeding, rocking, searching, waiting. She called old friends, but their voices were polite, distant. She tried to reach her sister in Atlanta, but the line rang into silence. The world, it seemed, kept moving forward, unbothered by the wreckage she was trapped in. One evening, as she sat on the floor beside Zara's bassinet, a knock came at the door, soft, deliberate. Her heart jumped. No one knocked here. Not neighbors, not friends. She had neither. When she opened the door, the hallway light fell across him. Brian Lockhart. He looked different out of the storm, no longer a figure carved from thunder, but a man in a charcoal coat, his presence somehow quieter, yet no less commanding. His eyes searched her face, soft with recognition, heavier with something else she couldn't name. "Miss Freeman," he said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding." Her voice caught. "How did you—" "The hospital," he admitted. "Doctor Martinez told me where to find you. I came to make sure you're managing." Managing. Such a polite word for drowning. "I'm fine," she said quickly, instinctively. He didn't believe her. His gaze flicked to the scattered bills, the half-empty crib, the takeout containers on the table. Then to Zara, who blinked up at him as if she recognized him from another life. "She's beautiful," he said softly, "just like her mother." Something trembled inside Crystal. Not quite gratitude, not quite fear. Compliments had always come with price tags. But his didn't sound like currency. His sounded like truth. "She's all I have," Crystal said quietly. "That's more than most," he replied. He stepped further in the scent of rain and cedar following him. "I'm not here to intrude. I just wanted to make sure you had what you need. Formula diapers, food. I don't take charity," she said sharply. He smiled faintly. "Good, because I wasn't offering any." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm offering employment," he continued. "You mentioned at the hospital that you worked in administration before nursing school. I need someone who can organize chaos. My assistant just quit." She stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "Completely. It's part-time, flexible hours. You could bring the baby if you needed to. The pay is fair. Fair. Coming from a man like him, that probably meant life-changing." She hesitated. "Why me?" Brian's eyes softened. "Because I watched you fight through something most people wouldn't survive. Because you didn't beg, you didn't break. You breathed through the pain and kept moving forward. That's the kind of strength I want around me." His words landed like light after too long in darkness. But light was dangerous. It made you hope. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow." "Then let tomorrow start here," he said simply, offering a small business card. Heavy paper, clean font, the name Lockhart Maritime embossed in silver. "If you change your mind," he added, "come to this address. No pressure." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. And Crystal, the way he said her name, not Miss Freeman, not ma'am, was enough to make her heartbeat stumble. Don't let his mistakes make you believe you're hard to love. Then he was gone, leaving silence, the scent of rain, and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. That night, Crystal couldn't sleep. The baby's breathing filled the room, rhythmic, innocent, while the wind outside whispered like a memory. She replayed his words again and again. Don't let his mistakes make you believe you're hard to love. Love. What a fragile, treacherous word. Once it meant safety promises forever. Now it meant rain pain, empty spaces where someone used to stand. And yet, there was something about Brian Lockhart that didn't feel like danger. He hadn't tried to fix her, or pity her, or claim her. He'd simply stayed. She closed her eyes, the faint hum of the city outside, mixing with Zara's soft coos. Maybe she thought survival wasn't enough. Maybe she needed to start living again. The next morning, she found herself standing across the street from the Lockhart Maritime building. Steel and glass caught the early sunlight, glittering like calm water after a storm. Men and women in suits moved with the brisk confidence of people who belonged. She felt out of place in her second-hand jeans and tired sweater, holding a baby carrier like a fragile truth. She almost turned back, but then Zara stirred, opening her eyes, dark, curious, full of life. "You're right," Crystal whispered. "We didn't come this far to run." Inside the lobby was all marble and quiet power. The receptionist looked up, ready to dismiss her, but froze when she saw Brian striding toward them from a private elevator. "Crystal," he said, genuine warmth lighting his face. "You came." "I thought I should—" "Thank you," she said awkwardly. "In person." "Then let me thank you instead," he said, glancing at Zara, who was staring up at him with disarming focus. "She remembers me. She doesn't forget kindness," Crystal murmured. Neither should you, he replied. He led her to his office, all clean lines and ocean light. Framed photographs of ships lined the walls, each vessel a testament to something built to survive storms. He gestured for her to sit, then handed her a folder. Job description, salary, schedule. Read it. Think about it. She opened it, but her eyes didn't move. They were on him, the quiet confidence, the way his presence filled the room without demanding space. Why are you really doing this? She asked. His gaze met hers, unflinching. Because you deserve more than survival, Crystal. And because I'd like to see what your life looks like when someone actually stays. Something in her chest cracked open, a place she'd kept sealed for too long. But she wasn't ready to show it yet. So she said the only safe thing left. I'll think about it. Do that, he said gently. But whatever you decide, know this. The world hasn't stopped offering you beginnings. You just have to say yes to one. When she left the building, the morning sun had broken fully through the clouds. The air smelled of salt and renewal. She looked down at her daughter swaddled in the ivory blanket that still carried his initials, and whispered, "Maybe this is where the storm ends." But deep down she knew storms never truly ended. They just changed shape. And sometimes, if you were brave enough, they led you exactly where you were meant to go, where a fragile new life begins, and the line between gratitude and love starts to blur beneath the same light that once broke the storm. The first morning, Crystal reported to Lockhart Maritime, the world felt steadier. She had walked to the harbor before sunrise, pushing Zara's stroller along the wet boardwalk. The air smelled of salt and possibility, that fragile space between night and morning, when everything, even a broken life, seemed briefly repairable. Brian had been waiting for her outside, coffee in hand. His shirt sleeves rolled, the early light softening his usual composure. "You're early," he'd said. "You said punctuality matters." He'd smiled. "I didn't say perfection." That had been 3 weeks ago. Now the rhythm of her days had changed, not fast, but enough to feel like breathing again. She worked from a small office, facing the water, typing reports and managing schedules, while Zara slept in a crib by the window. The building, with its endless hum of phones and the faint scent of sea and paper, had become a strange kind of home. But it was the evenings she looked forward to the most, when Brian would appear in the doorway, jacket draped over one arm, his gaze softening the moment it found her. "How are my favorite girls today?" he'd ask, the plural, making her pulse skip before she could stop it. Sometimes he'd hold Zara, while Crystal packed up. The sight never stopped startling her, the way his large, steady hands cradled the baby, as if holding something sacred, the tenderness that didn't seem borrowed or forced. He wasn't a man she could read easily. The world spoke of him as a self-made billionaire, cold, ambitious, relentless. But the man in front of her, the one who hummed lullabies off-key while balancing a baby on one arm, seemed carved from something gentler, something that understood loneliness far too well. One evening, he'd asked if she wanted to see where the company's story began. The docks, she'd guessed. He shook his head. Further out. They drove in silence along the coast until the city lights faded behind them. The road narrowed, lined with pines that leaned toward the sea. And then, there it was, a white house, perched above the harbor, weathered but beautiful, with a veranda that caught the last gold of sunset. "My parents built it," he said quietly, "after my mother got sick, said she wanted to die where she could still hear the sea." Crystal turned to him, the ocean wind tangling her hair. "I'm sorry." He nodded, not with grief, but with a strange acceptance. "She's the reason I started all this. Ships trade transport. It began with her dream to keep people connected even across oceans. I've been building ever since, maybe to keep her close." They stood side by side, the waves below, crashing softly against the rocks. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was alive, filled with unspoken things. Then Brian turned his expression unreadable. "I want you to use this house." She blinked. "What?" "You and Zara," he said. "You're commuting 2 hours every day. This place is empty most of the year. It's near the office, safe, quiet. You'd be doing me a favor by keeping it alive." Crystal's heart stumbled. "Brian, I can't. That's too much. I'm already working for you. You've done enough. I'm not offering charity," he said. The same calm firmness she was starting to recognize as his truth. "You're part of this company now. I take care of my team." She wanted to argue to protect the fragile independence she'd rebuilt. But when she looked down at Zara sleeping in the car seat, the decision was already made. The house by the harbor became their world. Mornings smelled of coffee and sea salt. Seagulls cried above the roof. Crystal would feed Zara by the window while the sun spilled across the water like melted gold. In the afternoons, she worked remotely, laptop balanced beside a stack of paperwork. Sometimes, when the wind grew strong, she'd step out onto the porch and close her eyes, letting it rush over her face. The same wind that once terrified her now felt like proof that she had survived. Brian visited often, sometimes for business, sometimes with no excuse at all. He'd arrive with groceries or flowers, or that quiet look of someone who'd found peace in someone else's company and didn't know how to name it. He never crossed boundaries. He never had to. Because something about him was already inside her days, in the way she brewed her coffee, the way he liked it, or how she caught herself listening for his car in the evenings, her heart betraying her reason. One night, after Zara had fallen asleep, they sat outside the harbor, spread before them like a sheet of liquid silver. A lantern flickered between them, soft and golden. "You seem quieter lately," he said. "Quieter?" She smiled faintly. "You mean I finally stopped panicking?" "I mean," he said, watching her, "you're not just surviving anymore." She looked down, tracing the rim of her mug. "Some days I almost forget what I've lost. Then I feel guilty for that." "Why guilt?" "Because forgetting feels like betrayal," she whispered. "To who I was, to what I thought love was supposed to be." Brian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe it's not forgetting. Maybe it's healing." She met his eyes, and for a moment, the world tilted, something unnamed sparking between them. Quiet, but undeniable. She looked away first. "I don't know what healing is supposed to feel like," she said. He smiled softly. "Maybe it feels like this, being able to breathe without waiting for the next storm." The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Before she could answer, Zara cried from inside, breaking the moment. She rose quickly, grateful for the interruption. But as she carried the baby back to sleep, her pulse wouldn't settle. His words replayed in her mind, like a song she didn't want to stop hearing. The following week brought a shift she hadn't expected. One morning she arrived at the office to find the air thick with tension. Reporters lingered outside, flashes from their cameras, bright as lightning. A scandal headline scrolled across a nearby screen. Lockhart Maritime faces lawsuit over alleged negligence in Gulf incident. Inside chaos reigned, phones ringing, employees whispering, tension rippling like electricity. She found Brian in his office, his usual calm replaced by exhaustion. "It's exaggerated," he said when she asked. "A shipment delay turned into rumor. Investors panic before they think." "Can I help?" she asked quietly. He looked up, then eyes rimmed with fatigue. "You already are." That evening she stayed late to sort through documents. When she finally walked into his office to drop them off, she found him standing by the window, tie loosened, looking out at the sea, like a man counting the distance between what he'd built and what he might lose. "You don't have to stay," he said without turning. I know, she answered, placing the folder on his desk. But you shouldn't be alone either. He turned then, and something in his face, the quiet vulnerability beneath all that strength, made her chest ache. Everyone leaves when the water gets rough, he said softly. Always has. Not everyone, she said. Their eyes locked, a moment stretched thin as glass, trembling under the weight of everything they weren't saying. He stepped closer, slow enough for her to stop him if she wanted to. She didn't. Crystal. He said her name rough in his throat. If I ever cross a line. You won't, she whispered. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to breath and nearness. Then Zara's voice carried from the baby monitor, soft and innocent and grounding. The moment dissolved like mist. He smiled barely. She has perfect timing. Crystal exhaled a shaky laugh. She takes after her mother. Then I'm in trouble, he murmured. She looked away, hiding the warmth rising in her cheeks. Go, he said gently. She needs you. But as she walked out, she knew he wasn't talking about the baby, and that terrified her because part of her wanted to turn back. That night in the harbor house, she couldn't sleep. The sea murmured against the rocks, the moonlight falling across Zara's crib in silver threads. She sat by the window, holding the ivory blanket, thinking of the man who'd given it to her, the man who'd pulled her from one kind of storm, only to awaken another. Brian Lockhart wasn't just kindness. He was possibility. And possibility, she'd learned, could be just as dangerous as loss. Still, as dawn broke over the horizon, she whispered into the quiet, maybe storms aren't meant to be feared. Maybe they're just the sea trying to find its rhythm again. Outside, the tide was rising slow, certain, unstoppable. And deep down, she knew her heart was doing the same. Spring arrived quietly, the way healing often does, not in grand gestures, but in the slow return of color. The house by the harbor bloomed with life. The air smelled of lilac and salt, and each morning, Crystal woke to the rhythm of waves tapping softly against the rocks. Zara had begun to babble words that weren't quite words, laughter spilling like sunlight through the house. And Brian, he'd become part of the rhythm too. Sometimes he stopped by for coffee before work, his tie still untied, sleeves rolled, as he held Zara with the kind of ease that looked almost dangerous to her heart. Other nights he brought dinner and stories about ships and storms, his voice low and rough, making her forget for a moment the edges of her loneliness. It was fragile, this peace, but it felt real. And that was enough. Until the past found her again. It started with a knock, a slow, deliberate sound that didn't belong to the easy world she'd built. Zara was napping. Crystal wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door and froze. Stephen. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, the lines around his mouth sharper, the shine in his eyes replaced by something jagged. He smelled of cologne and desperation. Crystal, he said softly. You look different. Her voice came out calm, but her heart thundered. What are you doing here? I had to see you. His gaze flicked past her shoulder, searching. And my daughter. She's asleep, Crystal said. And you don't get to call her your anything. He flinched, but forced a smile. I made mistakes. I know. But I've changed. I'm in recovery now, working again. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us. There is no us, Stephen. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. You left us. You didn't just walk away, you ran. I panicked, he said quickly. That night, I didn't know what to do. You left me bleeding on a hospital bed, she whispered, while your daughter came into this world alone. Silence. The waves crashed below the cliff, each one dragging up another buried memory. I was a coward, he said. Finally. his voice raw. But I'm here now. I want to make it right. Crystal's chest tightened, not with longing, but with the bitter ache of disbelief. You don't get to come back just because you regret it. I have rights, he said quietly. Her stomach turned cold. Don't you dare. He looked at her, then something dark flickering behind his remorse. She's my child too. No, she said. She's mine. You gave that up the night you left. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he stepped closer, not threatening but heavy with unfinished history. You're living with someone, he said suddenly, his tone shifting. I asked around. People talk. Brian Lockhart. That his car outside Crystal's breath caught. He's my employer. Employer, Stephen echoed with a bitter laugh. Right. That's what they're calling it. Her cheeks flushed with anger. You don't get to judge me. He leaned in, voice low. Careful, Crystal. Men like him don't play house forever. When he's done, you'll have nothing left, not even the illusion. Something inside her snapped. Get off my porch. He hesitated, then smirked faintly. You always did confuse kindness for love. And with that, he turned and walked down the path, leaving muddy footprints across the clean wood. Crystal stood there long after he'd gone, the scent of his cologne mixing with the salt air, until she couldn't tell where nausea ended and rage began. That night, she didn't tell Brian. She tried once, when he called, his voice warm and steady through the phone. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that the ghosts she'd buried had learned to swim? Instead, she said she was tired. He told her to rest, that he'd see her in the morning. When the call ended, she sat in the dark watching the lights of ships blink across the horizon, small, steady beacons that never quite reached the shore. The next morning, he noticed anyway. They were at the office. She was typing a report, but her eyes kept drifting unfocused. He stopped by her desk, setting a cup of coffee beside her. You didn't sleep, he said quietly. She managed a small smile. Motherhood. Try again, he said not unkindly. Something in his tone, the way he noticed things without prying, disarmed her. The truth slipped out before she could stop it. He came back, she whispered. Brian went still. Who? My ex. Yesterday. He wants to see Zara. The silence that followed was sharp. Then in a voice so low it almost trembled, Brian said, Did he hurt you? No, not physically. She swallowed hard. But he's angry. I think he might try something. He stepped closer. He won't touch you. Or her. Brian, no. His jaw tightened. Not again. The quiet fury in his voice startled her. For a moment, she saw not the businessman, but the man beneath the one who'd lost, who'd fought to protect something once and failed. She touched his arm gently. This isn't your fight. His gaze met hers unflinching. It is now. 2 days later, the fight arrived at their doorstep. She came home to find the front gate open, the porch light swinging, a man's shadow by the window. Her heart stopped. Stephen? He turned, startled by her voice. Crystal. Wait, I just wanted to see her. She's sleeping, she shouted, stepping between him and the door. You can't be here. I just want to talk. You had your chance. The argument rose with the tide, harsh, breaking, desperate. Then headlights swept across the driveway. Brian's car. He stepped out before it stopped rolling, his expression unreadable, the kind of calm that made fear look small. Mr. Freeman, he said evenly, you need to leave. Stephen sneered. And you are the man who's telling you politely to walk away. Stephen laughed, a brittle, angry sound. You think money makes you her savior? No, Brian said. But I won't stand by while someone tries to hurt her. The two men faced each other, one built of ego and regret, the other of quiet resolve. For a moment, Crystal saw the past and the present colliding like waves, both fighting for space in her life. Stephen shook his head, smirking. "You can have her. You'll tire of her soon enough." Brian didn't move. "You should go before I forget I was raised better." Something in his voice must have struck the right chord, because Stephen's bravado faltered. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off into the night. When the taillights disappeared, silence fell. Crystal's knees gave out. Brian caught her before she hit the ground. "It's over," he said softly. She shook her head, trembling. "No, he's not done. People like him, they don't stop." He cupped her face, his hands steady, his voice a quiet storm. "Then neither will I." Her breath hitched. "Why are you doing this?" His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Because you shouldn't have to fight alone." Later that night, after she'd finally fallen asleep, Brian sat outside on the porch, the sea wind curling through his hair. The moon hung low, silver and watchful. Inside, through the window, he could see her, the woman who'd turned his life into something frighteningly human again. And in the cradle beside her, the child he already thought of as his own. He'd built empires from logic, discipline, control. But sitting there, he felt none of those things. Only a quiet terror that he might not be enough to keep them safe. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the doorway, whispering to the dark, "I won't lose them. Not to storms. Not to ghosts." In her sleep, Crystal stirred. The wind rattled the windows, and for a moment she thought she heard footsteps, the echo of fear she hadn't yet shaken. She reached out blindly, hand brushing the empty space beside her. For a heartbeat, she wished he hadn't gone. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the harbor lights reflected on the water, unwavering even in the wind. And she realized sometimes the people who stay don't need to be beside you to make you feel safe. They just need to mean it. Still deep in her chest, something shifted, a longing, quiet but alive. Because she knew that the next time Brian looked at her, something fundamental between them would no longer be the same. The world didn't fall apart all at once. It unraveled quietly through whispers, glances, and headlines that carried more venom than truth. It began a week after Stephen's intrusion. The story spread first through the harbor, then through the city. Billionaire CEO living with single mother and child. He rescued from hospital. Crystal saw the headline by accident scrolling through her phone at the cafe near the office. The photograph was grainy, taken from across the street, Brian walking beside her carrying Zara's stroller. The caption twisted what had been an act of kindness into scandal. Her stomach tightened. Around her, the cafe noise grew distant, clinking cups, low chatter, laughter, all muffled beneath the roaring in her ears. She turned off the screen, but the words burned on the inside of her eyelids. By the time she reached the office, the air felt heavier. Conversation stopped when she entered. Even the receptionist's polite smile had a flicker of curiosity behind it. She kept her chin high, walking straight to her desk. But the whispers followed, faint, feathered, cruel. When Brian appeared at noon, he looked as if he'd already seen the damage. He placed a folder on her desk, his jaw set tight. "They went too far this time," he said. Who, she asked, though she already knew. "Tabloids, investors. Maybe your ex," he added grimly. "He sold them photos, or worse, a story." Her breath caught. "He wouldn't." "He would," Brian said, his tone clipped. "Men like him don't want peace. They want control." Crystal pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to steady herself. "What happens now?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "You'll need to stay away from the office for a while, until this dies down." She looked up sharply. "You're sending me away?" "I'm protecting you," he said. "You and Zara, by hiding me." The words came sharper than she meant them. I didn't do anything wrong. No one said you did. They don't have to, she said bitterly. You think I can't feel what they're saying? He reached for her hand, then stopped, aware of the glass walls, the watching eyes. Crystal, he said softly, please, just trust me. But the word trust lodged somewhere in her throat, too heavy, too close to all the time she'd given it, and been left standing in the wreckage. She stood slowly. I need some air. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked to the pier where the fishing boats slept beneath the fog. The sea was gray that day, dull, uninviting, like a mirror that refused to reflect her. Zara slept against her chest, tiny breaths rising and falling with the rhythm of the tide. Why does the world love tearing down what's finally good? She whispered, brushing her hand over the baby's back. Why can't peace ever last? She wasn't crying. Not yet. But the ache in her chest was sharp, quiet, relentless, the kind that steals your breath without ever taking a tear. Brian found her there hours later. He didn't call her name. He just sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. The gulls wheeled above, crying into the mist. I didn't mean to make you feel small, he said finally. You didn't, she murmured. Yes, I did. By trying to fix it instead of letting you stand beside me. She turned to him, then surprised by the honesty. His eyes were shadowed, tired. You're not the only one people are watching, he said. They've been waiting for me to fail since the day I started. You just became the easiest weapon they could find. So what now? She asked quietly. He looked out at the horizon. Now we don't hide. The conviction in his voice startled her. Brian, I won't let them turn what's good into something ugly, he said. Not this. Not us. Her pulse stumbled. Us, he hesitated. Then softly, if that's what it is. She looked down at Zara, who stirred lightly in her sleep. The baby's hand curled around her finger, anchoring her to a world she wasn't sure how to trust anymore. Brian, she said, her voice barely a whisper. If you keep standing next to me, they'll destroy you. He smiled faintly. You think I haven't survived storms worse than gossip? This isn't just gossip, she said. It's reputation, money, power. He turned to her, eyes steady. Then let them take all of it. I've already lost the only thing that ever mattered. Once I won't do it again. Something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from the unbearable tenderness in his voice. She wanted to tell him not to say things like that, not when she was still learning how to breathe without fear. But she couldn't, because she believed him. The following days blurred into damage control. PR statements, silence avoidance. Brian refused to distance himself, and that only fueled the fire. She watched him from the harbor office, calm, dignified, unbending, while the media painted him as reckless, emotional, compromised. One evening, as she packed her things, he appeared in the doorway. Ty loosened, the exhaustion of too many battles etched into his face. You're leaving? He asked. I thought it was better to work from home, she said. Less attention. He nodded, though disappointment flickered behind his composure. If that's what you need. When she reached the door, he said quietly, Crystal. She paused. Don't let them convince you this was a mistake. She turned to meet his eyes. Wasn't it? No, he said. The mistake would be pretending it meant nothing. Her breath caught. The room felt smaller, the space between them, suddenly alive with everything they weren't allowed to say. But then Zara cried softly from the stroller beside her, and the spell broke. She lowered her gaze. Good night, Brian. Good night, he said, but his voice carried a weight that promised it wasn't. That night, she lay awake in the harbor house, listening to the storm roll back over the sea. Lightning flickered against the windows, the same kind of storm that had brought him into her life. She thought of the headlines, The whispers, the way he'd looked at her on the pier, not as a man rescuing a woman, but as someone trying to reach her through all the walls she'd built. She whispered into the dark, "I can't lose this. Not again." But the storm outside didn't answer. It just kept moving steady, endless like time. A few days later, she woke to the sound of knocking, urgent, rapid. When she opened the door, Brian stood there, rain-soaked, his eyes fierce. "They published the second piece," he said. "About Zara." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "They're questioning her paternity, claiming she's mine." The world tilted. "That's not possible," she said, though the logic of it didn't matter. The damage already had shape. "I'm filing a lawsuit," he said. "Defamation, invasion of privacy." "But Crystal..." His voice softened. "This is going to get ugly." She sank onto the nearest chair, trembling. "He did this. Stephen. I'm sure of it. What does he want?" "To ruin you," Brian said simply. "To ruin us." She looked up at him, tears finally breaking free. "I can't do this again. I can't watch everything fall apart because I let someone in." Brian knelt before her, his hands gentle on her knees, his voice steady and low. "Then don't run this time. Don't let fear steal what you deserve." Her tears fell harder. "What do I deserve?" He smiled, small and broken, and so full of love, it hurt. "Peace. And someone who never leaves when the world starts whispering." She looked at him for a long time, at the rain clinging to his lashes, the raw honesty in his face. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing in the ruins of her life. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something terrifying, and knew a beginning. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea. But for once, the sound didn't scare her. It sounded like the truth finally learning to speak. The sea had gone still. For days, the wind that usually sang through the harbor went silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But Crystal knew what silence before a storm meant. It wasn't peace, it was warning. Since the second article, life had folded into shadows. She avoided town. Calls went unanswered. Strangers stared too long. Even the sound of her name on the news felt like trespass. Brian tried to shield her, but some things couldn't be shielded. They seeped through walls, through windows, through trust. At night, she'd hear the ocean outside and wonder if this was how freedom always ended, not with bars, but with eyes watching from the dark. One evening, as the sky bruised toward dusk, she found Brian in his office sleeves, rolled, jaw tense. The lamp beside him threw golden light across a stack of papers, legal drafts, statements, the weight of everything he was fighting. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, without looking up. She closed the door behind her. "Then tell me where else I should be." He exhaled, leaning back, exhaustion visible in the slump of his shoulders. "You don't have to be part of this." "I already am," she said. Their eyes met, and in that silence, the air between them thickened with everything unspoken. "Zara's asleep," she added softly. "I couldn't sit there doing nothing." He rubbed a hand across his face as though trying to erase the day. "They've called another hearing. The board's pressuring me to take a leave until this clears." Her heart clenched. "They think you're guilty. They think I'm a distraction," he said bitterly. "A liability with a weakness." She moved closer, the sound of rain beginning to tick against the glass. "And am I your weakness?" "Brian." His eyes lifted slowly to hers, a look that made her forget the distance between them. "No," he said, voice low. "You're the only thing keeping me from breaking." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to protect her, that she wasn't fragile anymore. But the truth, the unbearable truth, was that she needed him too, more than she wanted to admit. They drove to the harbor house in silence that night. The storm had started its slow return, thunder rolling far out at sea. The air smelled of salt and electricity. When they arrived, Brian followed her inside. Neither spoke as she set down her bag or lit the lamp. Zara slept soundly in her crib, her tiny hands curled around the edge of the blanket he'd once given them. Crystal stood by the window watching lightning flash over the horizon. "I hate storms," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But they end." She turned to him. "Do they? Or do they just find new names?" He took a step closer. "Maybe. But this one," his voice softened, "this one doesn't get to take you." Something inside her cracked. All the fear, the noise, the weeks of pretending she wasn't breaking it all came undone in one fragile breath. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You could lose everything." He hesitated, then crossed the room and stopped inches from her. "Because I already did. Once." Her pulse quickened. "Who?" He looked past her to the waves beyond the glass. "My wife, Anna. 5 years ago." She froze. He'd never spoken of her before. "She was pregnant," he said quietly. "We were driving home from a fundraiser. It was raining, not like this, worse. A truck ran the light." He paused, swallowing hard. "I walked away. They didn't." Crystal's throat tightened. She'd known he carried grief, but not this shape, not this depth. "She wanted to name our child Grace," he continued. "Said the name meant surviving what should have broken you. I built everything after that, the company, the empire, but none of it filled the silence." He turned to her, then eyes raw and unguarded. "Until that night at the hospital." She stared at him. "Brian, you were fighting to live," he said softly. "And I saw her in you, not because you reminded me of what I lost, but because you reminded me there was still something worth saving." Her tears came quietly, as if they'd been waiting for permission. He reached out, brushing one away. "I don't know how to love halfway anymore, Crystal. I tried. It doesn't work." The rain outside deepened the wind, pressing against the windows. Inside, time slowed the world, shrinking to breath and proximity. She whispered, "If this is real, we can't run from it." "I'm not running," he said. "But you are." She stepped back, trembling. "You don't understand. Every time I believe something is safe, it disappears. Stephen, the world, the noise, they all remind me I don't get to have this." "You do," he said fiercely. "You just have to stop punishing yourself for surviving." Something in his tone, part plea, part command, undid her. She reached for him before she could stop herself. He caught her wrist, not to stop her, but to anchor her. And then as thunder rolled through the night, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was everything they had both been too afraid to feel. The taste of rain and salt and grief. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for permission because it already carried every answer. When they broke apart, she was crying again, not from fear, but from the unbearable relief of being seen. He rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured, "you're not alone in it." The next morning came too soon. The storm had moved inland, leaving the air heavy and clean. Crystal stood by the window, watching the light creep across the sea. Zara cooed softly in her arms, as if sensing the change she couldn't name. Brian appeared behind her, coffee in hand, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked different in daylight. Not a rescuer, not a CEO, just a man trying to hold something fragile. "Board meeting's at 10, he said. "They'll want answers." "Will they ask about me?" she asked. He nodded once. "And what will you say?" He met her gaze steady. "The truth." She felt her chest tighten. "That you love me. That I choose you," he said. "Even if it costs me everything." The room went still. The words hung between them, quiet, dangerous, real. She wanted to tell him not to say that, not when the world was listening, but she also knew she needed to hear it. "Brian," she said finally, "if you fall, I don't have enough left to catch you." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about catching. Maybe it's about standing together when we hit the ground." Hours later, she watched him from the car as he walked into the boardroom. His shoulders squared, his expression calm. The building gleamed with glass and steel. Everything he'd built to protect himself, now reflecting the one thing he couldn't hide anymore. When he disappeared inside, she looked down at Zara. The baby smiled up at her, pure and trusting, as if the world wasn't capable of cruelty. "Your father," she whispered, and caught herself. The word startled her. Not wrong, not right, just inevitable. When he returned that evening, he didn't speak at first. Just walked into the house, loosened his tie, and poured a glass of water. "They voted," he said finally. "Temporary suspension. 6 months." Crystal's heart sank. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. They gave me time. I haven't had that in years." She moved toward him slowly. "What now?" He looked at her, tired but lighter somehow. "Now, I live." She smiled through the ache. "And us." He set the glass down, stepping close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Us," he said softly. "We see if love can survive the quiet before the next storm comes." That night, as they sat on the porch with Zara asleep inside, the sea whispered against the rocks. The air carried that fragile, suspended calm, the kind that could mean either peace or the promise of thunder. Crystal leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that some storms come back, just to make sure we still know how to hold on?" He smiled, eyes on the horizon. "Then let them come." Summer crept into Seabrook with the slow tenderness of forgiveness. The air carried the scent of seagrass and rain-warmed stone. On most mornings, Crystal woke to Zara's laughter, echoing through the house, a sound that somehow made the silence afterward feel alive instead of empty. Brian had been suspended for 3 weeks now, but the weight he carried at work seemed to have lifted elsewhere. He spent his mornings fixing things that didn't need fixing: a loose door hinge, a flickering bulb, the creak in the old wooden steps. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, not with hunger, but with the quiet awe of a man still surprised he gets to stay. For a while it felt like peace might last, until the world remembered them again. It started with a single photograph, a charity event one Brian had attended years ago. The picture showed him with Ivy, the ex-fiancée Crystal had only heard about in passing. The tabloids unearthed it, like buried treasure, weaving stories around it. Lockhart's secret reconciliation. Was she ever gone? By the time Crystal saw the article, her phone was already buzzing with messages from people she hadn't heard from in months. "Is it true? Are you okay? I told you men like that always go back." She turned off the screen and sat on the edge of the bed, the walls closing in around her. For the first time in months, she felt that familiar ache again, the one that whispered she'd been foolish to believe in quiet endings. When Brian returned home that evening, the tension was already waiting. He stopped when he saw her expression. "You saw it?" She nodded, holding out the phone without a word. He glanced at the photo, exhaled softly, and set it face down on the table. "It's from 3 years ago. The night I told her it was over." "She's saying otherwise," Crystal said quietly. "She told reporters, you two have been talking again." He looked up sharply. "That's not true. She said you've been helping her through a hard time." "I sent her a lawyer," he admitted. "She's being harassed by the press, too. I didn't want her dragged through more dirt because of me." The honesty should have comforted her, but instead, it deepened the ache. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't think it mattered," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Because it doesn't. It does to me, she said, voice trembling, because the world already thinks I'm the mistake you'll regret. He closed the distance between them, his voice soft but steady. Crystal, look at me. She did reluctantly, fear in her eyes. I don't care what the world thinks, he said. I care about what we build here, what's real. Her throat tightened. Then stop deciding what's real for both of us. The silence that followed was sharp trembling at the edges. Outside, the sky had begun to turn that golden, almost unreal hour before the sun vanished. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. They didn't speak much after that. He spent more time in his study phone calls that stretched late into the night. She spent her evenings by the window, watching the tide creep higher up the rocks. The house, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt too big for the three of them. One afternoon, Zara toddled across the living room, clutching the ivory blanket in one tiny fist. She tripped, fell, and started to cry, a small, startled sound that pierced through the house. Brian rushed in first, scooping her up, murmuring soft reassurances. Crystal stood in the doorway, heart tight, because she realized in that instant how natural he looked there, how easily he fit into the space she'd once sworn no one would ever fill. When their eyes met, something in her broke. The distance they'd built between them felt both necessary and unbearable. The next day, Ivy showed up. It was mid-morning. Crystal was pruning the garden when a sleek black car stopped by the gate. The woman who stepped out was striking all poise and precision, wrapped in a white coat that looked too clean for the salt air. "Crystal Freeman," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I was hoping we'd meet." Crystal froze, garden shears in hand. "You shouldn't be here." "I just came to talk," Ivy said, smiling faintly. "Brian doesn't know." "That's probably for the best," Crystal replied. "Whatever you have to say. I want to apologize." Ivy interrupted. "For the press, for the stories. They twisted everything. I didn't mean for it to hurt you." Crystal studied her. "Then why are you here?" The smile faltered. "Because I needed to see who he threw everything away for." The words landed like ice. "I loved him," Ivy said quietly, "for years, but grief made him unreachable." "You," she gestured toward the house, "you made him feel again. You should know that's not always a blessing." Crystal's grip on the shears tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," Ivy said. "He saved you because he couldn't save her. But when he remembers that, where does that leave you?" The question lingered, poisonous and precise. Crystal took a step back, her voice calm but trembling underneath. "You can leave now." Ivy's gaze softened, almost pitying. "I hope I'm wrong," she said, turning away. "But people like Brian, they don't love twice. They rebuild, but they don't stay." The car disappeared down the road, leaving only the echo of her perfume and the faint sound of the sea. That night, Crystal didn't tell Brian about the visit. She wanted to every time he looked at her, like she was still home. But Ivy's words clung to her ribs like thorns. He'd said she reminded him of his wife, of Grace, the child he never held. And now she wondered, had she become a substitute for the love he'd already buried? The thought gutted her, because for her, he wasn't a replacement. He was the first person who made her believe she could be more than what she'd survived. A few days later, the storm returned. Not the kind made of rain, but of truth. Brian came home late, exhaustion written across his face. "The hearing's over," he said quietly. "They've cleared my name. Full reinstatement. Relief should have come. It didn't. Because something in his voice was wrong, too calm, too careful." "What's the condition?" she asked. He hesitated. "They want me to relocate operations to New York for 6 months." Her heart stuttered. "New York." "It's temporary," he said quickly. "Once the noise settles, I'll come back." She stepped back, the space between them, suddenly cold. And you want me to wait? I want you to come, he said. Both of you. She shook her head. You know I can't. Zara's barely walking. My life is here. Our life is here, he corrected softly. Is it? She whispered. He looked at her, the man who had held her through storms, now helpless against this quiet undoing. Crystal, please no, she said, tears trembling in her voice. You promised you wouldn't leave. I'm not leaving, he said. I'm trying to build something that lasts. She smiled through the ache. You already did. You just don't see it. He left 2 weeks later. The morning air was pale blue, still damp from dawn. Zara clung to his collar, refusing to let go, until he whispered something against her ear that made her giggle through her tears. When he finally looked at Crystal, his eyes held the same storm she'd first seen in them. I'll be back, he said. She nodded, but said nothing. When the car disappeared down the coastal road, the world went quiet again. Not the peace of safety, but the silence of missing someone who had become a part of your breathing. That evening she walked to the harbor. The sunset painted the water gold, the same color as his eyes when he said her name. Zara played with shells at her feet, laughing at the sound of waves. And for the first time, Crystal understood what Ivy had meant. People like Brian didn't love twice. They loved once deeply, irrevocably, and spent the rest of their lives trying to make that love matter. But maybe she did too. She whispered into the wind, If love is a storm, then I'd rather drown in it than never feel the rain again. Autumn arrived early that year, painting the harbor in gold and farewell. The air smelled of salt and dry leaves, the sea restless again after months of quiet. Every morning, Crystal walked Zara down to the water's edge. The child had learned new words since Brian left Wave Sky Daddy. Each one felt like a promise she couldn't keep. She wrote to him sometimes short emails about Zara's first steps, the new sound of her laugh, the tiny world they were still building by the sea. He replied rarely, but always kindly. I miss her laugh. I miss home. Home. The word stung, because she wasn't sure if he still meant her. 6 months passed. The tabloids moved on, chasing newer scandals, newer ghosts. Seabrook returned to its rhythm. The townspeople stopped whispering, though some still looked at her with the soft pity reserved for women whose stories ended too soon. But Crystal no longer lived for their approval. Her hands were steadier now, her gaze clearer. She'd survived storms both literal and the kind made of people. What haunted her now wasn't fear. It was longing. Some nights when the wind howled against the windows, she would imagine his voice threading through the dark, the low, certain tone that once anchored her to herself. And she'd wonder if love could stretch across silence without breaking. Then, one gray morning in November, a letter came. Not an email, paper, ink, handwritten. Her heart stumbled as she opened it. Crystal, if I could tell you what New York feels like, I'd call it noise. The kind that fills every space until you forget what quiet sounds like. The company is stable. The lawsuits are done. My name is clean again, though it doesn't feel like a victory. I think about the harbor more than I should, about the sound of Zara's laugh, about you, the way you hold silence like it's something holy. I never understood peace until I lost it. I'm coming back soon, but I need you to know if you found a life that doesn't need me, I'll understand. I just hope you kept the light on. Brian. Her hands trembled as she read it. The last line burned behind her eyes. I just hope you kept the light on. She looked toward the window. Outside, the sky was pale and cold. The old lighthouse on the far cliff blinked once, then again, steady, patient, constant. And she realized she'd never turned it off at all. He returned 3 weeks later, unannounced. The afternoon was windless, the sea flat as glass. Crystal was in the garden trimming the last of the summer roses when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Her heart knew before her eyes did. When she looked up, he was there standing by the gate, coat dusted with salt wind, a tired smile breaking across his face. He looked older not in years, but in wear, the kind of tired that came from fighting battles no one clapped for. "Hi," he said softly. She couldn't speak. Her throat closed around every word she'd rehearsed in his absence. He stepped forward, hesitant, as if the air itself was fragile. "You cut your hair." She nodded. It kept getting in the way. He smiled faintly. "Looks good." They stood there for a long moment, the distance between them humming with everything they hadn't said. Zara's inside, she finally managed. "I know," he said. "I saw her through the window. She looks taller. She's faster too." Crystal said, a soft laugh breaking through the tension. "Chases the gulls every morning. Just like her mother," he said. The laughter died into silence, not awkward but sharp with tenderness. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would." She studied him, the quiet steadiness in his eyes, the humility in his stance. He didn't look like the man who had left to reclaim a kingdom. He looked like someone who'd finally learned what mattered. That evening he stayed for dinner. Zara climbed into his lap halfway through, babbling stories in toddler fragments, as if her small body recognized something her memory couldn't explain. Crystal watched them from across the table, father and child, though no blood bound them. Something deep inside her softened and ached all at once. After Zara fell asleep, they moved to the porch. The sea stretched beneath a silver moon, quiet and endless. "I thought about you every day," he said, voice low. "But I didn't write more, because I didn't want to keep pulling you backward." "You didn't," she said. "You were always here, even when you weren't." He looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. "Did you stop waiting?" She hesitated. "No, but I stopped holding my breath." He smiled faintly. "That's good." Silence again, full but not empty. "New York felt like survival," he said after a moment. "But this," he gestured toward the harbor, the stars, her. "This feels like living." She looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "You came back changed. So did you," he said. "You don't look scared anymore." "I'm not," she said, "because I finally understood something." "What?" "That love doesn't save you," she said quietly. "It just gives you something worth staying alive for." The wind lifted, carrying her words out over the water. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with the steady reverence of someone touching a miracle they thought they'd lost. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for a beginning." She turned her hand, fingers threading through his. "Then stop asking," she whispered. "We already began." Weeks passed, and life found its rhythm again. Not perfect, but true. Brian spent his mornings fixing the harbor's old boats, his afternoons teaching Zara how to skip stones. Crystal reopened the small clinic she'd dreamed of for years, a place where women like her, those left behind by storms, could start again. They named it the Bridge Hearts Foundation. On the opening day, the whole town came. Reporters too, but this time the story was different. No scandal, no headlines. Just a quiet headline buried beneath the noise: "Billionaire helps single mother build hope." When Brian stepped onto the small stage to speak, the crowd hushed. He didn't read from notes. He looked at Crystal, then at Zara, sitting on her hip, and said simply, "The world measures success in what you build. But the truth is, sometimes the most important thing you'll ever build is trust. And if you're lucky, love teaches you how to keep it standing." The applause came like a wave, Crystal felt tears rise not from sadness, but from something far larger, the quiet certainty that they had finally turned their pain into purpose. That night, after the guests were gone and Zara asleep, they stood by the water. The lighthouse blinked in slow rhythm, painting their faces in gold and shadow. "She'll grow up knowing what love looks like," Crystal said softly. Brian looked at her. "Because she sees it every day." She smiled, leaning into him. "You think it lasts? Even after everything?" He kissed the top of her head. "Love doesn't always stay loud," he said. "But the right kind, it never leaves." The wind moved around them, gentle and constant, carrying the scent of salt and roses. Far off, the lighthouse beam swept across the dark water, steady and unbroken. Crystal closed her eyes, whispering, "We made it through the storm." Brian's hand tightened around hers. "No," he said. "We learned how to dance in it." And when dawn came, the harbor glowed not with brilliance, but with something better, something real. The kind of light that doesn't fade when the sun goes down, the kind that stays. Years later, visitors to Seabrook would say the same thing. There's a house by the harbor where the windows always glow at dusk. No matter the weather, the light never goes out. They wouldn't know the story, how two broken hearts once met in a storm, or how they built something that outlasted it. But maybe they didn't need to, because sometimes love doesn't need to be seen to be believed. Sometimes it only needs to stay.